Right now, at this exact moment, streaming platforms have algorithms that know the exact second your heart rate is going to spike while you're watching a show.
Mm-hmm.
And they've basically structured their entire platform to ensure that you absolutely cannot hit the pause button when it happens.
Yeah, it is incredibly precise. I mean, we like to think of fear or suspense as this, organic, uncontrollable emotion.
Right, like it just happens to us.
Exactly. But in reality, it's a highly calibrated, mathematically engineered response. The media we consume is actively manipulating our psychology in ways we often don't even consciously register.
Okay, so let's unpack this because, originally when human beings wanted to experience fear in a safe environment, we told scary stories around a campfire.
Right. The oldest trick in the book.
It was simple. The crackle of the wood, the darkness pressing in from all sides, the storyteller's voice dropping to a whisper. It was this shared, deeply intimate experience of the unknown. But today, that campfire has evolved. Now, the campfire is like the glowing screen of your smartphone at 2 in the morning.
Or a pair of noise-canceling headphones isolating you on a crowded subway train.
Yes, exactly. We're still seeking out that primal thrill, but the architecture of how we are scared has become wildly sophisticated.
It really has. We aren't just dealing with storytellers anymore. We're dealing with multimedia platforms, streaming pacing models, interactive digital folklore, and even artificial intelligence. The very mediums themselves dictate the rules of the fear.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are exploring the evolving architecture of fear, storytelling, and the unknown in the digital age.
It's a massive topic.
It is. And I was actually reading this fascinating stack of research that explores this from pretty much every angle. We have some academic theses looking at found media and the pacing of binge culture television. We've got practical, behind-the-scenes guides on writing audio fiction, an exploration into psychological horror manga, and a really dense scientific paper on the ethics and the mysterious black box of artificial intelligence.
And our goal here isn't just to talk about what monsters are hiding under the bed. We're looking at human psychology, the deeply rooted desire for community, and how modern technology dictates the exact manner in which you consume information.
Right.
This is really about giving you the ultimate toolkit for media literacy. Understanding how narratives and algorithms are structured to hook you it'll fundamentally change the way you consume everything from a Netflix binge to your daily newsfeed.
I want to start with the most intimate medium we have right now, which ironically brings us closest to that original campfire audio.
Yes, audio is fascinating.
I was looking at an article from Electric Literature by Mark Solinger. He's the co-creator of the massively successful horror audio drama Archive 81. And his biggest foundational rule is that you absolutely cannot treat audio fiction as just television without pictures.
It's a critical distinction, and honestly, it's where a lot of creators fail. Audio is a unique sonic medium. If a writer just takes a standard TV script, hands it to some voice actors, and hits record, the audience is going to be completely lost.
Yeah, because there's no visual context.
Exactly. Solinger points out that you have to make the settings and the plots sonically interesting from the ground up.
Right. He gives this great hypothetical example that really clicked for me. He says, imagine you have a sci-fi story about a team of archaeologists decoding an ancient alien script carved into a temple wall.
Classic trope.
Very classic.
Yeah.
And visually, on screen, that looks incredibly cool. You see the glowing runes, the dust falling, the dramatic lighting. But sonically...
It is incredibly boring.
Right. It's just people standing around in total silence, occasionally saying, look at this symbol here.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So to adapt that for audio, Solinger says you have to build the plot around the auditory experience. Instead of a visual script on a wall, you make the aliens a sightless species that leaves behind singing crystals.
Oh, that's so smart.
And the characters have to decode the harmonic frequencies of these crystals to understand the message. Suddenly, the medium matches the narrative. The listener is actually hearing the puzzle being solved.
He also talks about the rule of vocal distinctness, which is something you never even think about until it's done poorly.
Oh, definitely.
If you don't have visual cues, like seeing someone's mouth move, it is incredibly easy for an audience to confuse who is speaking. Solinger recommends a hard cap, actually. He says never have more than 4 separate voices in a single scene.
And even with just 4 voices, you have to really engineer their differences. You have to make them completely distinct in pitch, cadence, or accent.
Yeah, he even jokes that when in doubt, just Right, robot characters.
Right, because giving a character a staticky mechanical voice with some audio distortion always sounds cool, and it instantly subconsciously differentiates them for the listener without them having to think about it.
Because if the listener is using their brain power just to figure out who is talking, they aren't engaged in the suspense.
Exactly. Audio traps you entirely in your own head. And that leads to the second major advantage of the medium, which is forcing the audience's imagination to do the heavy lifting. The source material strongly warns against over-describing things.
I am so glad you brought this up. This is where audio horror truly thrives.
Right.
Because, in a visual medium, you just see the monster.
Right. There it is on the screen.
The director designs it, the CGI team builds it, and boom, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
In a book, an author might spend a full paragraph describing the monster's scales, its glowing eyes, the slime dripping from its jaws.
Mm-hmm.
But in an audio drama, if a character spends a full minute explicitly describing every physical curve of a monster standing right in front of them, it sounds completely ridiculous.
It ruins the immersion completely.
Right. Nobody talks like that when they're terrified.
What's fascinating here is how our brains process isolated sounds and incomplete information. Solinger points out that instead of describing a visual, you just give an audio clue and let the listener's brain panic.
Yes. The example he gives is so visceral. Instead of having a character say, "Oh no, a giant monster with 50 teeth is looking at me," you just play the wet, heavy sound of viscera dripping onto a tiled floor.
Yeah.
And you have a character just mutter under their breath, "There's too many teeth," and boom.
Your brain does the rest.
Exactly. Your brain takes those two inputs,
Yeah.
the dripping sound of the word teeth, and it creates something infinitely more terrifying than a Hollywood CGI budget ever could.
And it is customized terror, because the monster your brain creates from those audio cues is specifically tailored to what scares you the most.
It's like walking through your own house in the pitch dark.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Thanks. I mean, the layout is completely familiar to you, but because you're deprived of visual information, every single creak of the floorboards forces your brain to invent an intruder.
Right.
The lack of visual information is the engine that actually generates the terror. If the lights were on, there's no fear. By keeping the lights off in the audio drama, the creator weaponizes your own imagination against you.
And it goes beyond just imagination. It's a physiological response. Solinger details how, without visual context, certain mundane sounds become incredibly disturbing. Take the sound of kissing, for example.
Okay.
On a television screen, a makeout session looks romantic or passionate. You have the context of the actors, the lighting, the music.
Right.
But in total isolation, if you close your eyes and just listen to a high-fidelity, isolated audio track of the wet, smacking sounds of two people kissing, it is incredibly gross and off-putting.
It really is. Once you strip away the visual romance, it just sounds biological and, well, weird.
Precisely. And conversely, audio creators can weaponize biological sounds like vomiting, chewing, or heavy congested breathing to create extreme localized discomfort in the listener.
You're physically reacting to the sound waves.
Exactly. They're hitting your eardrum. It bypasses the logical part of your brain and hits your nervous system directly.
And it's not just the audio itself. It's how the audio is packaged before you even hit play. I was reading this guide from Cuckoo FM, which is a massive audio platform on how to write podcast and audiobook descriptions, specifically for horror and thriller stories.
Right, the marketing side.
It is a masterclass in psychological priming. The marketing itself has to be engineered to create anxiety.
This is a vital part of the architecture. The description acts as the threshold. More than half of all listeners read the description before hitting the play button.
Right, and the guide recommends a very strict, almost mathematical structure for these descriptions. They say it should be exactly 3 sentences long.
Just 3 sentences.
Not a full paragraph, just 3 sentences. First, you use high-level literary language to immediately set a heavy atmosphere. Second, you give a tiny, ambiguous glimpse of the plot. And third, you absolutely must end on a cliffhanger.
That's brilliant. By ending on that cliffhanger in the text, the creator is intentionally opening a cognitive loop in your brain.
A cognitive loop.
Yeah, human psychology hates unresolved loops. You read that unresolved third sentence, and you feel a mild psychological itch. You literally have to hit the play button just to close the loop and relieve that tiny bit of tension.
Wow.
They are pre-setting the atmosphere of dread and compliance before the first audio file even loads.
So audio traps us by forcing our brains to fill in the blanks. It uses isolation and the absence of visual data. But streaming television has the exact opposite problem. It shows us absolutely
Right.
everything.
Right.
So how do modern visual mediums manage to manufacture that same feeling of entrapment when the lights are on and you can see the whole picture?
That is the fundamental challenge of modern visual storytelling, and it requires a completely different architecture. We reviewed a brilliant Scripps College thesis by Samantha Richards on narrative adaptation and the evolution of television pacing.
Okay.
This thesis argues that to understand how we are scared today, you have to understand the mechanical history of television.
She traces the history of TV horror through distinct eras, showing how we eventually arrived at our current binge-watching culture. It starts with what she calls TV1, which ran roughly from 1950 to 1975. Think of shows like The Twilight Zone or Dark Shadows.
To understand TV1, you have to look at the physical limitations of the medium at the time.
Right, the technology itself.
Exactly. The television sets were small, the picture was black and white with low resolution, and crucially, viewing was a communal family activity in the living room.
Which meant heavy broadcast censorship.
Mm.
You couldn't rely on gore, you couldn't show extreme violence, you couldn't even use certain words.
No, absolutely not.
So how do you scare an audience when your hands are completely tied by the censors?
You rely entirely on structure. Because they couldn't show visceral horror, shows like The Twilight Zone used anthology storytelling. Every single week, they dropped you into a completely new, weird world with unpredictable rules. They would spend 20 minutes building the psychological tension and then hit you with a massive paradigm-shifting twist at the very end of the episode. You had no idea what to expect the next week because the slate was wiped clean.
The thesis brings in film scholar Tom Gunning's concept of the cinema of attractions to explain why this structured tension works so well. And I love this part because it goes way back to the early days of film.
Oh, the Lumiere brothers.
Yes, there's this famous myth about the Lumiere brothers in 1895. They showed a short film of a train arriving at a station moving directly toward the camera. And the legend goes that the audience supposedly screamed and ran away in terror, thinking a real train was about to crash through the screen into the theater.
Right. It's the classic origin myth of cinema. It paints early audiences as incredibly naive.
Exactly. But Gunning argues that this is fundamentally a myth. Audiences in 1895 weren't idiots. They weren't actually fooled into thinking the film was a magical window into reality.
They knew they were in a theater.
They knew it was a projection. The thrill wasn't that they were tricked. The thrill was their willing suspension of disbelief.
Gunning calls this the embrace of an operational aesthetic. The audience knows it's a trick, but they love the anticipation of the trick being pulled. It is the preparation and delay of a shock that generates the pleasure.
Preparation and delay, that is such a crucial concept. It is the absolute foundation of the jump scare.
Mm-hmm.
You know the killer's in the house. You see the main character slowly walking toward the closet door. The music drops out. The camera pushes in. That is the preparation.
Right.
The delay is the agonizing 5 seconds where her hand hovers over the doorknob. You know something is going to jump out. The tension comes from waiting for the inevitable release.
Yeah.
And that preparation and delay is how early television built tension without having to break broadcast rules. They just stretched the rubber band as far as it could go.
But eventually, audiences adapt, and the medium has to evolve. This brings us to TV2, which the thesis defines as running from the late 70s through the 90s. This is the era of hybridization and narrowcasting.
Cable television expands the options.
Exactly, and networks realize they don't have to make one show for the entire family. They can target specific niche demographics.
This is where we get the golden age of serialized network horror and suspense. Shows like Twin Peaks and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But this era ran into a massive structural wall that the thesis calls the surprise acceptability problem.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of storytelling, the surprise acceptability problem is a delicate tightrope walk. You want to shock your audience with a twist, but the shock still has to be acceptable within the established logic of the story.
Right.
If the twist violates the rules you've set up, the audience feels cheated and they abandon the narrative.
I'm so glad the thesis uses Twin Peaks as the ultimate cautionary tale here, because it is the perfect example. Twin Peaks premiered in 1990, and it created a massive, culturally defining question. Who killed Laura Palmer?
Everyone was talking about it.
It was avant-garde. It blended soap opera melodrama with terrifying supernatural horror. But the creator, David Lynch, never actually wanted to answer the core question. He wanted who killed Laura Palmer to be a perpetual ambient mystery that just allowed him to explore the dark underbelly of this quirky town forever.
But the network completely disagreed. They were operating on a traditional TV1 mindset. Mysteries need to be solved to satisfy the audience. So they forced Lynch to explicitly reveal the killer halfway through season 2.
And once they did that, what happened?
The show's narrative engine completely fractured. They violated the core premise of the show's own operational aesthetic. The audience was tuning in for the preparation and delay of the Laura Palmer mystery.
And once it was solved?
Once the release happened, the tension evaporated. The writers tried to pivot to other storylines, introducing new villains, but the audience felt alienated. The central gravity of the show was gone, and the ratings plummeted.
Which perfectly sets the stage for TV4. Hyper-serialization and binge culture. If Twin Peaks was constrained by weekly network schedules and executive meddling, streaming platforms like Netflix completely obliterated those constraints.
Completely.
The thesis uses Stranger Things as the prime example of a hyper-serial built from the ground up entirely for binging. The creators, the Duffer Brothers, don't write episodes in the traditional sense. They literally structure a season as a seamless 8-hour movie.
Let's look at the specific pacing that thesis breaks down for Stranger Things. Season 1, Episode 3, which is titled Holly Jolly. If you chart the narrative tension of this episode, it looks completely different from a traditional network show.
How so?
The massive scares are entirely front-loaded and back-loaded, leaving a massive valley in the middle.
Walk me through that, because when I watched it, it just felt like a great episode of TV. I didn't notice the machinery at all.
That means the machinery is working perfectly. The episode opens with the immediate resolution of the previous episode's cliffhanger. The character Barb is sitting alone on the diving board at a party, and she gets dragged into the alternate dimension, the Upside Down.
Right, I remember that.
It is terrifying, it is action-packed, the stakes are literally life and death, and all of that happens in the first 2 minutes of the episode.
Right, and then the show just completely slows down.
Exactly. For the next 40 minutes, there are barely any scares at all. It is entirely mundane character building. You watch Nancy dealing with teenage angst and high school drama. You watch Chief Hopper going to the library to do research.
It's normal TV drama.
Right. You watch Joyce Byers frantically stringing up Christmas lights in her living room. There are tiny ambient moments of tension flickering lights, a weird noise, but no massive new information is revealed. The narrative rubber band is just sitting there, completely slack.
Until the last 4 minutes of the episode. The pacing suddenly spikes out of nowhere. The boys are out looking for their missing friend Will, and they see the state troopers pulling what looks exactly like Will's dead body out of the quarry lake.
It's a huge moment.
It is a massive, heart-wrenching shock. The music swells. The episode ends on this devastating image of Joyce hugging her older son, police sirens wailing in the background, absolute, total despair.
And here's the genius of the streaming model. You don't have to wait a week to see the emotional fallout.
Right.
On a traditional network, you would have to sit with that despair for 7 days. But Netflix doesn't even pause to ask, are you still watching? It just auto-plays the next episode in 5 seconds, and that next episode picks up at the exact millisecond the previous one ended.
It's weaponized momentum. In the TV2 era, writers literally had to write a script to give the audience just enough satisfaction to keep them waiting an entire week. But now, in the TV4 era, you write to actively prevent the viewer from finding a natural stopping point to hit the pause button.
Exactly.
You engineer the pacing to enforce a continuous multi-hour viewing session. You put the massive shocks right at the seams between the episodes so the viewer physically cannot bring themselves to turn it off.
And creators have found these incredible structural hybrids to keep the fear fresh over long periods without exhausting the audience. Look at how Buffy the Vampire Slayer evolved the format.
Oh, with the big bad.
Right. They invented the big bad structure one overarching, highly serialized villain per season, but they mixed that with standalone Monster of the Week episodes to break up the pacing. It allowed them to maintain a macro-level tension while providing micro-level releases.
Or look at American Horror Story. They perfected the seasonal anthology. Every single season is a brand new story in a new setting with the same actors playing completely different characters. It solves the Twin Peaks problem because the narrative engine resets every 10 episodes. It never gets stale. But then brilliantly, over the course of several seasons, they slowly revealed a hidden, shared universe connecting all these seemingly disparate stories. It rewarded long-term, eagle-eyed fans who were paying attention, adding an entirely new layer of retroactive tension.
The thesis even highlights a highly experimental sci-fi channel show called Blood Drive. It simulated a gritty 1970s grindhouse aesthetic. But what was truly innovative was how they utilized the structural constraints of the medium itself. They actually used the built-in cable television commercial breaks as part of the narrative manipulation.
Wait, how does a commercial break manipulate the narrative?
They would air fake in-universe commercials for evil corporations from the show's plot right before transitioning into the real commercial break.
Oh, that's incredibly clever.
It blurred the lines of the viewing experience. The audience never quite knew when the story actually paused and when reality resumed. It manipulated how long the audience felt they were engaged, creating a continuous sense of disorientation and paranoia, even when they were technically just watching an ad for laundry detergent.
Okay, so binge watching is incredibly immersive. You're locked in for 8 hours, the pacing is controlling your heart rate, the commercial breaks are lying to you, but at the end of the day, you're still just sitting on your couch in your sweatpants.
Right.
It remains a fundamentally passive experience. You are watching something happen to someone else. So what happens when the narrative structure actively demands that the audience step inside the story and participate?
That completely shatters the barrier between consumer and creator. And that brings us to our third source, a fascinating SUNY Cortland thesis by Jax Mello on a genre called found media.
Now, most people are very familiar with found footage movies. Think the Blair Witch Project or Paranormal Activity. All right, the rules for those are pretty simple. It's a feature film. It is shot to look amateur and realistic. The characters who supposedly shot the footage are usually dead or missing. And the person who found the footage and is presenting it to you has nothing to do with the story itself.
Right, found footage is just a stylistic framing device for a traditional movie. But this thesis identifies a new, distinct evolution of this genre that emerged native to the internet called found media. And found media has two massive defining differences that separate it from traditional movies.
Let's break those down, because this is where the line between fiction and reality gets genuinely blurry. First, the protagonist of found media isn't just a victim holding a shaky camera. They serve as a mediator for the audience. And second, the media itself is created with the explicit, baked-in intent to connect the audience together in the real world.
To illustrate this, the thesis looks at an incredibly influential YouTube series from 2009 called Marble Hornets. For those who don't know, it was an internet-based web series built around the mythos of the Slender Man.
I remember that.
But it wasn't just a series of spooky videos you watched on a playlist. The story played out across YouTube and Twitter in real time over the course of years.
The setup is brilliant in its simplicity. The main character, Jay, starts uploading his missing friend's raw, unedited tapes to a YouTube channel. And he actually justifies this action to the audience within the narrative. He says he's uploading them as a permanent record.
Right, there's a practical reason in universe.
Yes, because he realizes that whenever this monster, which they call the operator, is near, people suffer from extreme supernatural memory loss. They forget what happened to them. So the YouTube channel is literally his external hard drive for his own sanity.
He is the mediator. He is speaking directly to the YouTube comments section, asking for help, explaining his thought process. And the audience is watching him, video by video, slowly realize that by looking for his friend, he is now being hunted himself.
But the interaction goes so much deeper than just leaving a comment on a video. There was a secondary, antagonistic YouTube channel involved in the story called Twofark. And this channel would post cryptic, deeply terrifying response videos filled with visual codes, distorted audio, and complex cryptograms.
And this is where the architecture changes from passive to active. The audience, the real-world viewers, sitting at their computers would immediately flock to Twitter and Reddit to crack these codes in real time. They were decrypting audio files, reversing text, solving ciphers.
Wait, so if the audience is solving these puzzles in real time, how does that affect the story? If a group of Redditors solves a cryptogram faster than the creator intended, does the creator have to rewrite the monster's lore on the fly?
In many cases, yes. That is the essence of an alternate reality game, or ARG. The creators are monitoring the community's progress. Jay, the character, would tweet updates based on what the audience discovered.
That's amazing.
At one point, he tweeted about waiting outside an antique store to look for a missing character, and he posted updates over several days, interacting with fans who were tweeting advice at him like he was a real person in real danger.
That is wild. By solving these codes and theorizing online, the audience was literally participating in the creation of the Slender Man mythos. The thesis calls this digital folklore, or ostension. The fans were crowdsourcing the monster's lore.
Exactly.
If the community came up with a terrifying theory about how the monster operated, The creators could adapt and weave that into the actual narrative. It made the horror infinitely more effective because it felt like a collective, tangible reality.
The thesis also analyzes the massively popular, long-running podcast, The Magnus Archives. It operates on a similar, though less explicitly interactive, wavelength. Here, the mediator is a character named Jonathan Sims. He is an archivist working for an institute organizing written statements of paranormal encounters.
Okay.
And he reads these statements out loud into a tape recorder.
But the tape recorder itself is not just a prop. It acts as an intradiegetic character. It has a mind of its own. It clicks on by itself to intentionally spy on characters having private, supposedly off-the-record conversations.
And as the series progresses, Jonathan, the mediator, slowly realizes the horrific truth of his situation. The various supernatural entities that are hunting him and the rest of the world are actually sustained by human fear. They feed on it.
Oh.
And eventually, Jonathan is put in a position where he literally has to read these horrific statements out loud to sustain his own life.
He becomes a literal proxy for the audience. We, the listeners in the real world, need to hear the horror for our own entertainment. And he, the character in the fictional world, needs to read the horror to survive. It perfectly mirrors our own voyeuristic relationship with scary stories.
This highlights a profound and unexpected paradox in found media, the presence of hope. Think about traditional found footage like the Blair Witch Project. What is the emotional takeaway?
Bleak isolation.
Right. Everyone dies alone in the woods. It is a pessimistic genre.
Yeah, there is no community in Blair Witch, just 3 people screaming at each other until the camera drops.
But found media, because it inherently demands audience interaction, collective problem-solving, and shared investigation, actually fosters a deeply supportive real-world fan community.
That makes sense.
The characters within the fiction might suffer horribly, but the shared act of witnessing the horror together breeds hope. You are not experiencing the terror alone in the dark. You are figuring it out side by side with thousands of other people. The community itself becomes the safe campfire.
Okay, I see the appeal to the community, but I have to push back here. Isn't there a severe, real-world danger to this deliberately blurred reality?
It's a huge risk.
The thesis itself mentions the tragic 2014 Slender Man stabbing. 2 young girls in Wisconsin lured their friend into the woods and attacked her because they genuinely believed that digital folklore was real and that they needed to appease the Slender Man.
Yes.
If the audience is solving codes, interacting with characters on Twitter in real time, and crowdsourcing a mythology, aren't they basically co-authoring a delusion?
It is a very valid, incredibly serious concern. When you engineer a fictional narrative to perfectly mimic authentic, lived experience, and you place it on platforms designed for sincerity, like Twitter or personal YouTube vlogs, you are playing with something highly volatile.
It's like an escape room. An escape room is incredibly fun because you know it's fake. You get the adrenaline thrill of being locked in a dungeon, but you know the game master's watching on a camera and you can leave whenever you want. The operational aesthetic is intact.
Right.
But if the locks actually stopped working and the clock kept ticking and you couldn't get out in the night, the game instantly turns into a genuine nightmare. The fun relies entirely on the boundary of fiction.
Precisely. The creators of found media are relying entirely on the audience maintaining that operational aesthetic, trusting that everyone knows it's a trick. When that line breaks, especially with younger or more vulnerable consumers who lack strong media literacy, the psychological manipulation crosses over into genuine danger.
Blurring the lines of reality online is terrifying. It preys on our inability to trust what we see on a screen. But sometimes the most horrific blur is not between the internet and reality, but between our own internal perception and our external lives.
A completely different kind of terror.
I want to pivot away from algorithms and internet mysteries for a moment. Let's look at a medium that doesn't rely on jump scares, audio tricks, or real-world ARG elements, but instead visualizes our deepest, most private internal anxieties. Let's talk about psychological horror manga.
We reviewed an in-depth exploration from Gamerant alongside detailed translated materials on the manga Kasan. What stands out so starkly about psychological horror manga, especially compared to Western horror comics, is how it exploits primal, shockingly mundane human fears.
Right.
It doesn't need a vampire, a zombie apocalypse, or a masked slasher. It takes the quiet, desperate, pathetic parts of the human condition and literalizes them on the page.
Kasan, written by Daruma Matsura, is a perfect, devastating example of this. It dives headfirst into the crushing psychological burden of beauty standards in society. The main character, Kasan, is a young girl who is mocked relentlessly, almost sadistically, for her physical appearance. People are cruel to her every single day.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. But internally, she is a brilliant, profoundly gifted actress.
And the supernatural element is introduced not as a monster, but as a twisted tool. Her deceased mother, who is a legendarily beautiful and famous actress, leaves Kassan a magical tube of lipstick.
The lipstick.
The rule is simple. If Kassan wears the lipstick and kisses someone, she literally steals their face. She swaps appearances with them for a limited time.
It's a brilliant, tragic setup. And what does she do? She makes a dark pact. She uses the lipstick to take the face of a beautiful actress who has incredible looks but zero talent and suffers from a debilitating sleeping disorder. So Kassan gets the beauty, the fame, the adoration on stage that she always craved and deserved.
But the horror doesn't come from the magical lipstick. The horror comes from the total erosion of her identity. She is losing her true self to maintain an illusion. Every time she looks in the mirror, she sees someone else.
She has to live in constant fear of it wearing off.
Exactly. She lives in constant terror. The monster in this manga isn't a demon. The monster is the societal pressure that convinced a young girl that her own authentic face was worthless.
And then you have a manga like PTSD Radio by Masaki Nakayama. Now this one is genuinely chilling, not just because of the art, but because of the meta-story behind its creation. The manga itself is an anthology of terrifying, uncanny valley ghost stories centered around a bizarre entity called Ogushi that travels through human hair.
The artwork is profoundly unsettling. Nakayama uses intense, hyper-detailed shading to make the mundane seem alien.
But the real horror is what actually happened to the creator in the real world. While working on PTSD Radio, Nakayama and his team started experiencing unexplainable phenomena at their studio.
Yes, the production became genuinely cursed. They found an old, broken, desecrated shrine near their studio workspace. Staff members reported seeing shadowy figures out of the corners of their eyes. The lights would flicker and die.
And it culminated in Nakayama himself developing a severe, unexplainable autoimmune disorder. The illness caused his face to swell, his lips to blister, and he literally started physically spitting up blood.
Which was a direct mirror to the events in his comic.
Exactly. A terrifying, direct mirror to the horrific events he was drawing in his own comic panels. The psychological and physical toll was so heavy, the fear was so genuine, that he was forced to abandon the project and put the manga on indefinite hiatus.
It is the ultimate collapse of the operational aesthetic we talked about earlier. The fiction bled into reality. But even outside of cursed productions, manga excels at taking psychological trauma and making it a physical threat.
Like Trigun.
Yes. Look at the series Trigun. The premise is that people who suppress their mundane frustrations, the guy who hates his boss, the person stuck in a bad marriage, the student stressed about exams, literally transform into grotesque, hyper-violent monsters based on their specific repressed desire.
It's a literal metaphor for what happens when a polite society forces you to bottle up your emotions until you explode.
Or look at Blood on the Tracks by Shuzo Oshimi. This is a masterwork of suspense, and there are absolutely no supernatural elements in it whatsoever.
None at all.
It is simply the suffocating, claustrophobic horror of a young middle school boy slowly realizing that his seemingly loving, overprotective mother actually has a severe, dangerous personality disorder. The artwork meticulously captures these fleeting, silent moments of discomfort, a weird look in her eye, a hesitation that slowly escalate over volumes into full-blown panic.
Or Zashiki Onna, which is widely considered one of the most terrifying manga ever written because it's just a gritty, hyper-realistic depiction of a stalker. A creepy woman knocks on a college student's door one night and slowly, methodically, gains access to his entire life. There's no ghost, no magic, just the total violation of personal safety. I'm struggling a bit to bridge these concepts, though.
How so?
Well, a manga about a girl stealing faces with lipstick or a stalker at the door is terrifying, but how does that translate to the broader architecture of fear we've been discussing?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these stories are effective precisely because they strip away the supernatural to reveal the psychological reality beneath. In the audio dramas, the Netflix shows, the ARGs, we're looking at how the media manipulates us. But the manga shows us why we let it.
Oh, I see.
We invent these horrific fictions. Monsters, ghosts, alternate dimensions to safely process the things in our real lives that we cannot control. Societal expectations, mental illness, toxic relationships, random violence. The fiction gives a face to the formless anxieties of modern life.
Which is the absolutely perfect transition to our final source. Because we've spent this entire deep dive looking at the monsters we create in our fiction to process our lack of control. But right now, out in the real world, Humanity is building a highly complex thinking system that we literally cannot control or fully understand. Let's talk about the reality of artificial intelligence.
We reviewed a highly detailed scientific paper from the International Journal of Innovative Science and Research Technology. The paper focuses on the ethics, norms, and fundamental mechanics of AI.
Right.
And they start by defining artificial intelligence as the simulation of human intelligence through a combination of cognitive computing, machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, and natural language processing.
Wait, let's break that down because that is a massive wall of technical jargon. People use terms like machine learning and deep learning interchangeably in the news all the time, but what actually separates them structurally?
It's a hierarchy of complexity. Machine learning is the broad concept that a computer can learn from data without being explicitly programmed for every single scenario. You give it data, it finds patterns.
Okay.
Deep learning is a specific, highly advanced subset of machine learning. It utilizes neural networks, which are algorithms modeled directly on the structure and function of the human brain.
So instead of just a linear flowchart of if-and statements, it's a web of connections.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where the paper discusses a phenomenon that is genuinely terrifying to computer scientists, the black box. To explain how a neural network becomes a black box, the paper uses a very concrete example of training an AI to simply identify an image of a volcano.
Okay, walk me through exactly how an AI looks at a picture of a volcano.
A neural network is composed of massive layers of artificial neurons or nodes. You feed the system thousands of digital images. The very first shallow layer of the network might just scan the pixels for simple edges and lines.
Just outlines.
Right. It passes that information to the next layer, deeper in the network. That layer looks for specific colors, reds, oranges, ashen grays. It passes that to the next layer, which looks for geometric shapes, like a cone.
So it's building the concept of a volcano piece by piece.
Yes. And as you train the network by showing it millions of correct images of volcanoes and incorrect images of regular mountains or bowls of soup, it constantly adjusts its own internal triggers and the weight of its connections to get the right answer more often. It is teaching itself how to see.
But here's the terrifying part. The final pathway that the AI creates to reach that correct answer is a black box. The network is so deep and the connections are so massively complex that even the original programmers who built the AI cannot mathematically explain why it made a specific decision.
Right.
They can see the inputs, the pictures, and they see the output, the AI saying, this is a volcano. But the logic taking place in the middle layers is completely alien, opaque, and indecipherable to the human mind.
And a volcano is a harmless example. But that exact same lack of transparency drops us into a massive ethical quagmire when we apply this technology to society.
And just pause here for a moment for you listening, because we know discussions of bias, ethics, and society can get politically charged very quickly. We want to be clear that we are impartially reporting the scientific paper's findings here. We aren't taking a political stance or endorsing a specific viewpoint, but simply conveying the source material's technical, structural concern regarding how these systems operate.
And the technical concern is profound. When a black box AI is making decisions about mortgage approvals, criminal sentencing risk assessments, or filtering resumes for hiring practices, and no human being on Earth can explain why it rejected a specific applicant, we have a catastrophic problem of accountability.
Absolutely.
The paper highlights massive concerns about algorithmic bias. An AI system is only as moral, objective, and fair as the data it is trained on.
Right. If you feed a machine a data set of historical hiring practices spanning 50 years, and that historical data inherently contains human biases, say historically favoring male applicants over female applicants for executive roles, the machine doesn't know what sexism is. It just sees a mathematical pattern for success.
It automates the bias.
It will learn that pattern, automate it, and create discriminatory outcomes without even realizing it, all hidden behind an impenetrable wall of complex math.
To address this fear, the paper quotes Professor Luciano Floridi from Oxford University. He uses a brilliant, grounding analogy. He says, imagine walking into a completely dark room in a strange building. You can stand there and panic about the monsters that might be lurking in the dark, or you can simply turn on the light to avoid bumping into the furniture.
I like that.
For AI, the light is the establishment of strict, mandatory norms, transparency, accountability, and fairness. We have to demand that these black boxes be opened, audited, and explained. We cannot allow society to be run by systems we don't understand.
I love that dark room analogy, but I have to apply to everything we've talked about today. Isn't the black box of artificial intelligence exactly the same mechanism as the psychological horrors we just unpacked?
What do you mean?
We are treating AI like the mysterious tape recorder turning itself on in the Magnus archives.
Yeah.
We're treating it like the unexplainable alien intelligence of the Demogorgon in Stranger Things. We have built a machine with an alien logic, and our primary primal fear is that it is observing us, sorting us, and judging us for reasons we cannot decipher. It is the ultimate manifestation of the unknown in the darkroom.
This raises an incredibly important question, and the scientific paper actually touches on the psychological impact of this. The ethical implications of AR surveillance go far beyond just data collection or denying a bank loan.
Right.
When an algorithm uses your data to manipulate your behavior without your consent, like a predictive algorithm feeding you specific video content to alter your mood, keep you binge-watching, or influence your purchasing habits, it actively undermines your capacity for autonomous, rational decision-making.
Which brings us right back to Cassine and the magical lipstick.
Yeah.
Losing your identity and your autonomy to an unseen, unknowable force. That is the textbook definition of psychological horror.
It really does bring us full circle. We've traveled a remarkably long way today through the architecture of fear.
We really have.
Yeah.
We looked at how audio fiction uses the selective absence of sound, the dripping viscera in the dark, to force your brain to paint its own highly customized nightmares. We saw how the binge-engineered, hyper-serialized pacing of Netflix shows traps you in a continuous multi-hour cycle of preparation and delay. We explored how found media and alternate reality games use real-time community interaction to blur the line between digital folklore and reality, turning the audience into co-authors. We analyzed how manga strips away the supernatural to hold up a horrific psychological mirror to our mundane, real-world anxieties. And finally, we looked at the literal opaque code of neural networks operating in the black box of AI, judging us from the dark.
And the absolute through line connecting every single one of these mediums is that fear and engagement are deeply calculated architectures. They are mathematically and psychologically engineered. So why does any of this matter to you? Why should you care how a horror podcast is edited or how a neural network processes a pixel?
Exactly.
Because understanding these structures gives you power. Media literacy is your armor against manipulation.
Exactly. When you recognize the mechanics of the three-sentence cliffhanger description on an audiobook, or you understand Tom Gunning's operational aesthetic when watching a movie, or you grasp the terrifying opacity of the algorithm black box curating your social media feed, you can step back.
You regain control.
You can analyze why you feel anxious. You can recognize why you feel a sudden, intense compulsion to keep watching, to keep scrolling, to click the next link. It takes the power away from the algorithm and hands it back to you. It turns you from a passive consumer of media into an active, critical thinker.
You are no longer just reacting blindly to the scary shadows on the wall. You are examining the projector, looking at how the light is being cast, and realizing it's just a trick of the lens.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today. We just talked about how AI neural networks learn by absorbing massive, unfathomable data sets. They scrape the entirety of the internet to learn how to mimic human thought, art, and language.
Right.
But our data sets are filled with all of the things we've discussed today. They're filled with our horror narratives, our psychological anxieties, our biased historical data, our internet folklore, and our deepest, darkest fears of the unknown. So if we are training this new alien intelligence on the absolute entirety of human dread, we aren't just building a calculator.
No, we're not.
We are building a digital funhouse mirror that reflects our worst psychological biases back at us, but at 1,000,000 times the speed. What kind of ghost in the machine are we inadvertently teaching the AI to become?
That is a genuinely chilling thought. If the machine learns what it means to be human by reading our horror stories and analyzing our anxieties, the output might be something we are entirely unprepared for.
Something to think about the next time you're sitting alone, illuminated only by the glowing screen of your smartphone at 2 in the morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep turning on the lights in the dark rooms, and always, always question the narratives and the algorithms around you.